I went several times to Armenia, and I went to Tatev. This is a monastery site. There was a group of children doing a dance that I recognized. I said, wait a minute, that's Papuri. How do they know that? Well, the young priest that was leading them, had learned from a dance leader in Armenia, Gaga Ganosian, who was trying to revive the old dances. And he had learned from Gary and Susan Linsananian in Boston. So here was a dance that started in Western Armenia, which is now Turkey, came to the U.S. with the survivors of the genocide, was preserved here because of these compatriotic unions, mostly, people getting together and dancing. And then it went back over the ocean, and now it's danced in Armenia.
Hello and welcome to Dispersion. Dispersion is a podcast by the Zorian Institute that analyzes and celebrates both the diverse and the common experiences of diasporas living away from their homeland. I'm your host, Jen. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Dispersion. I really can't wait to get into today's conversation with our talented and interesting guests. Through their stories, as usual, and their lived experience, and also their bodies of work for today's episode, we are going to be exploring art, movement, identity, homeland, all of those relationships that usually we get into. So I'm really excited. I think you're going to find this a fascinating conversation. So without further ado, I'm joined today by Carolyn Okoomian Rapkievian and Sevag Avakian. As always, their bios are going to be in the show notes. They both have extensive and really interesting histories, so I would encourage you to check those out. There'll probably be some links in there where you can see visually things that they've done in their work. But first, I'll tell you a little bit about each of them, and then we'll get into our conversation. Carolyn has been researching, teaching, and performing dance in a professional capacity for more than 30 years. She grew up dancing at Armenian family and social functions. Her directing highlights include the Washington D.C. Arev Armenian Dance Ensemble and the Arax Armenian Dance Ensemble. Carolyn has held leadership positions in museums for over 50 years, including 26 years at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. This means she has lectured internationally about genocides, understanding history, and the politics of cultural acknowledgements in museums. In 2018, she curated the Armenian Dance Showcase at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, which we're going to hear a little bit more about. And she currently works to document and preserve the historic Western Armenian village dances in collaboration with the Houshmandhian Foundation. Sevag developed a passion for Armenian dance at a young age, growing up in a family deeply rooted in dance and cultural tradition. Beginning his training at just the age of 6, he was immersed in music and movement early on, and it's been a constant influence throughout his life. As he matured, his natural curiosity and dedication led him to independently study traditional Armenian folkloric dances, exploring both their techniques, their cultural and historical significance. He is now the artistic director and choreographer of the Sassoun Dance Ensemble. Thank you both so much for joining us, for taking the time, for being up to having this conversation today. So I just want to say a big welcome before we get started.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you for having us.
As always, I'm going to remind our guests, but also our audience, that this is always a conversation. So what you'll hear today, we're going to go back and forth. We're going to answer some questions, but the outcome ultimately is to talk about your lived experiences and some of your reactions to the work that you do. So I'm going to start with our first question. It's kind of a big one, but it sets the tone well. So we talk a lot about the concepts and experiences of home and homeland on the podcast. So I'd like to start by asking you both, how do you define home today? And has this definition changed over time as a member of the diaspora? Carolyn, I'm going to call on you first. Kick us off.
Well, thank you. And I wanted to talk first about diaspora because I tend not to use that term. I think it's too neutral. We're scattered around the world because of the genocide. And for that reason, our culture is very fragile. And we can't go back and live in our homeland the same way that we could since time immemorial. And so thus I tend to say that we are Armenians in exile. I was very fortunate to go on an extraordinary trip this past summer with the help of Elif Shannon Chastain and other Turkish friends. I was able to find the villages and towns of my grandparents. And it was really meaningful because I really felt like that was home in a way. And so I even was saying, I'll write to you when I get back to the United States, but I wasn't saying when I get back home because I feel like we are very connected as Western Armenians to that land, and that the land has a memory of us, and we have a memory of the land. And even I think some of our rhythms come directly from the topography of that place. So that's just the beginning of the answer.
And what a beautiful way to start us off. Thank you, Carolyn. Sevag, for you, how do you relate to and define home today? And would you say there's been a point in your life where that definition was different?
I think so. For sure, it's changed. So I'm myself, I'm born in Lebanon, but I moved to Toronto with my family, not even at 1 year old. I was less than a year old. So definitely raised in Toronto. But I've gone to Armenian school for a big chunk of my career, school years, from JK up until junior high. And we were always taught that Armenia is home. And I think that was a way for us to learn where we came from, to learn about our identity as a people. Armenia was always home, and that's how we connected with our roots. But I think as time went on and as I grew, I began to realize that home is more so a combination of the diaspora and of Armenia. So Armenia is our home. We connected emotionally. We base our understanding of our cultural identity on it. And Toronto, in my case, is where I began to create a reality of those emotions and that identity. And I started to create a new meaning of what home is for me.
I am so excited for the rest of this conversation. You have both the most eloquent and beautiful ways of putting things. It's just going to be so lovely. Thank you both for sharing just a little bit of that perspective that you have. And now the other half of that is I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background with dance. So how were you first both introduced to dance? We've heard a little bit in your biographies, but can you take us back more anecdotally to that early memory and when you realized you had that kind of sensation in you that this is something you wanted to dedicate your life and your time to? We'll flip the order. Sevag, I'd love for you to kick us off this time.
Sure. So in my case, my parents were involved in dance and they instructed the Hamaskain Armenian dance group here in Toronto in the 90s. My earliest memory, I'd say, is probably going to practices with them multiple times a week. They kind of preferred to take my sister and I to practices to be immersed into the culture rather than just sitting at home with a babysitter. So I didn't know it at the time, but self-consciously, of course, without realizing it, I was being influenced and I was being immersed in that culture. Eventually, we became older. We joined the group and we started performing with the group. So in my case, I was 6 years old when I started dancing with the group, and then I also started taking part in dance performances in school. But at that point, I didn't realize that that's something I wanted to dedicate myself to. It was more so something that I was doing because it's what I knew, it's what I grew up doing. There even came a point in my life where I didn't really like dancing, to be honest. I would go to dinner dance events, barantes events in the Armenian community, and I wouldn't get up to dance. I didn't like it. Um, at this point, my parents, they had stopped their involvement with the Hamaskayan group, and it wasn't until 2004 when the Archpriest Father Zade Zargarian of the Toronto Holy Trinity Armenian Church, he approached my parents and he wanted to start this Sassoun Dance Ensemble, which exists until today. So my sister and I were ecstatic. I guess we missed those old dance days when we used to go to practices with my parents. We encouraged them to start back up, and they did. And after years of dancing, we slowly started to get involved, more involved in the teaching, the creation of dances, And that's when I started to begin to realize that my true passion is in dance. Not only the dancing part of it, but also I wanted to learn more about the history of our culture, our dances, the movements. So that's when I began kind of researching and teaching myself more and more, to the point where my sister and I took over the dance group in the early 2010s. And since then, I've been completely dedicated to Armenian dance. I can safely say my life revolves around it.
I love that. I think that applies to so many things in childhoods in general, when you're kind of immersed in that, and it's that osmosis where you start to take it in, and then you realize that it comes back into your life, and it is maybe more in your identity than you thought it would be. Carolyn, how about for you? Do you have a similar experience with it, or is it a little bit of a different path you took?
It's a little bit different. I uh, started Armenian dancing as soon as I could walk. There's actually a film of me when I'm a year and a half and I'm holding on to my grandparents and we're all dancing in the living room, which happened probably every Sunday. So I grew up going to the Armenian picnics in Massachusetts. They were in the summertime, and the different compatriotic unions, they called them. So they were the people from different villages, mostly in the Boston area. It was Harpert and Gesaria. And they would have picnics, but everybody went to, everybody's picnic. Now, I'm told that, the Harpetsis were always trying to have the better band, and the Gesariatsis were always trying to have the better band or the better food. So there was a little competition, but it was always great music and dancing. So I grew up with that. And then I discovered the what I'll call the stage Armenian dances. And so what I learned in my research later on is that under the Soviet Union, the Russian ballet masters were sent to all of the republics to sort of clean up, pretty up, make the folk dances for the stage. So to me, folk dances are the community social dances that just sort of evolve by ordinary people dancing. And I use the term then folkloric for the stage dances. And these dances, when the companies from Armenia would tour around the world, the Armenians in the diaspora or in exile, we'll say, um, they were really wowed by these stage dances. And, partly the identity politics of it being the Republic of Armenia, everybody started adopting these stage dances, and they're beautiful. I in my dance groups, I learned those, and I love dancing them. I'm a dancer anyway, of different kinds of dance, so I love those dances. And at some point, I started, adding my own choreographies to them. So when I lived in Nashville, Tennessee, I think there were two other Armenians there. I started a little Armenian dance group, and we performed at cultural festivals. And then when I went with my job to New York City, I got to dance in the Antranig Dance Ensemble. And Gage Karapetyan, the director of the State Dance Ensemble from Yerevan, was our artistic director. So I got to study with him, and I love that dance is an art form that is always evolving. He was a creator. He knew the origins of the steps and the old village dances, but he took it to another level and created modern choreographies. So I learned those, and that was very exciting. And then, Sevag, I was interested to hear that you say 2004, because it was in 2004 that I was starting in DC. Well, I was there in DC, but in 2004, a group of Armenians came to me and they said, "We're Armenian dancers and we need a dance teacher. Would you be our leader?" And I said, no, I'm opening a big national museum this year. The Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian opened in 2004. And I said, but okay, let's get started. And so that was a really wonderful group because those were Armenians from all over the diaspora and from all over our original homeland. So there were Armenians from Lebanon, from Iran, from Canada, from Montreal, from France, from Cyprus, from Moscow, from Armenia, from uh, Istanbul. So it was really the diaspora reunited in a way, and it was a wonderful group. And along with that, though, I still had this passion for the original village dances. And when we did performances, I was always very clear in my announcing of the dances. This dance is, an ancient dance, and we're doing it authentically. And this other dance, we have traditional steps, and we've made it look nice for the stage. And this third kind of dance, it's a completely modern invention with Armenian style. So anyway, I retired eventually to Maine, and I was really missing Armenian dance. There's not a big Armenian community. In fact, there's only one other Armenian I know in my whole county. But it was right at the time of the pandemic. And some dance colleagues, Tom Bozigian and his wife Cherie, and Gary and Susan Linsananian, longtime dance historians and teachers, and Robert Harutyunyan in New York City, um, we started getting together on Zoom. And it was really Tom that instigated this, saying, there are a lot of these old village dances that are getting lost, and what are we going to do about it? So we came up with the idea of making this video archive. And yet we didn't want to be the ones hosting this archive. So fortunately, the Hushamadian project adopted this idea. It's a site that documents cultural traditions before the genocide. And there was music and recipes and stories and games. But there was no dance. And so it was a great match. They supported us by um, allowing us to hire live musicians, Armenian musicians. So we had to choose, okay, what are the 20 most important dances that we record? Maybe somebody will use them. This is like a library. And so we picked 20 and we recorded in the Boston area. And then we picked about another 20 and we recorded in Detroit. In Detroit, there's a big Vanatsi community. So, in different cities where we recorded, there was more of an emphasis of different dances. And then we recorded in New York City. And one of the interesting things that we discovered in our research is that actually these old dances survive better in the US than in most places, even in Armenia. So I guess after the genocide, the Armenians, I don't know, that went to France, they just wanted to adopt French culture. The ones that went to Lebanon really excelled in choirs. I went several times to Armenia, and I went to Tatev. This is a monastery site. There was a group of children doing a dance that I recognized. I said, wait a minute, that's Papuri. How did they know that? Well, the young priest that was leading them, had learned from a dance leader in Armenia, Gaga Ganosian, who was trying to revive the old dances. And he had learned from Gary and Susan Linsananian in Boston. So here was a dance that started in Western Armenia, which is now Turkey, came to the US with the survivors of the genocide, was preserved here because of these compatriotic unions, mostly people getting together and dancing. And then it went back over the ocean, and now it's danced in Armenia. But I'll say one more thing. I know I'm going on so long, but one of the interesting things to me is what was the original music that went with those dances? And that's a little bit hard to untangle, because what happened here when there were those Armenian picnics, people got together, musicians played with each other. And so they started taking the music from this village and the music from that village and making medleys. And so now that's what people play. This is what the musicians play. It's what people are used to hearing. But it didn't used to be that way. So can we match the original tamzara from a particular village to that original melody? And what I've been doing is I have a collection of 78 records, and with the help of our Addiction and others, I look for those old recordings and how did they play it and where were those musicians from. And so if I can hear the same melody over and over and over again on those old 78 records, then that gives us a clue. This was the original music for it. So that's and I also, up here I teach Americans Armenian dances, and that's another whole thing. I'll give Sevag a chance to talk more about
Carolyn,
American.
I feel like you've sent my historian brain just in like 27 directions there, and I'm now thinking like, well, how can I get involved in mapping music to its origin? And just what a fascinating element. I feel like maybe hopefully we'll get into that in the questions later, but to kind of root us back, one of the things you mentioned, Carolyn, was dance evolving. So you were talking about another creative and how dance evolves. So I'm curious to know for you both how your own identity has evolved with dance. So Carolyn, at the top of our conversation, you also mentioned your recent trip and your travels back to the villages of your grandparents and having that moment as part of your story. How has that changed the way you view your practice with dance and your relationship with dance?
I don't think it was so much this recent trip, but in 2015, I got to go to Istanbul. The Hrant Dink Foundation uh, asked me to a conference. I was speaking about museums, and uh, and I asked, "Is there an Armenian dance group in Istanbul?" And um, I got to go to a rehearsal, and I was so excited. I thought, "Okay, I'm going to see the dances of my grandparents. I'm in Turkey where they were, and here's a dance group." Well, in fact, they were dancing the stage dances from, I think, from Gaga Karapetyan. They'd studied with him from Soviet Armenia. So I was a little bit disappointed there. And I think that experience propelled me towards, finding the origins of our dances and really the history research. Another thing that's so fascinating to me in this work for the Hushamajian documentation project is actually trying to pinpoint where dances originated that spread a little bit, but also where the names of them came from. So, for example, the dance Daldala, uh, we knew that that meant go back, but it's not in the Armenian language, it's not in Turkish, it's not Kurdish. We couldn't figure out where that what that language was, and a linguist friend helped me look in out of print dictionaries, and it turns out that it was an extinct dialect of Armenian. So, you know, the I guess dance has propelled me more and more into history. Um, yeah.
Which is kind of a lovely and maybe unsuspecting convergence. I think when we think about history and cultural preservation, often we think about oral history and all the headways that has made. But from the sounds of it, dance and the preservation of historic and traditional dance also opens these doors to, like you say, linguistics. Sevag, for you, I'm curious because you work with the younger generation, or you work with younger Armenians as part of your work through the Sassoun Ensemble. How do you think, or what's been your experience with the formation and the facilitation of an Armenian identity for the younger generation in Toronto? And what role do you think dance, cultural dance, plays in that?
Yeah, our group mostly consists of younger students. I'd say starting from 14 and going up to the 30s. I think for the younger generation, Armenian identity has become more of a hybrid of being Armenian and being Canadian in our case. Whereas in previous generations, especially for first generation Canadians, their identity was more so driven solely by being Armenian. But as time went on, naturally, second, third, fourth generation Armenians created this new identity of being Armenian in the diaspora. I think they're still very much in touch with their Armenian roots, but they also understand they live in the diaspora and they have to be in line with being Canadian. So they've learned to create this new home. And being away from home, we've always been taught Armenia is our home, but I believe dance has helped them create this new home. They have their everyday lives heavily influenced by living in the diaspora, but at the same time, twice a week, in our case, they get to come to practices, they listen to Armenian music, they learn Armenian dance and the history, they speak Armenian, and in general, they stay in touch with their Armenian roots. And honestly, I think I see that it's something they genuinely want to do, the younger generation, especially since in the diaspora, sometimes, in our case, anyways, there's been a negative stigma with it, especially with folk cultural dances, especially among the youth in our community. But more and more generally, I see. The interest by the youth in our community. It's helping them identify as an Armenian living in the diaspora, living in Toronto in this case.
One of the Yeah, a kind of follow-up question for that. One of the things we've talked about on this podcast, but as well in my own experience, although I don't sound like it, my parents are British and I grew up in Canada. I only moved here as kind of a young teenager. And their experience moving and my experience kind of settling in Canada are quite different, even though we're parent child, two different generations. And I know that that happens quite consistently with lots of diaspora communities. You have first generation, second generation who have their own identities, their own way that that identity manifests in their life. So I'm interested, Sevag, for you, do you have anyone who takes part or is in the troupe who um, maybe has a different experience? Because I know for you, your parents were really involved and that was something you grew up around. You kind of had that osmosis we talked about. But do you have folks, or have you seen that happen where this is maybe kind of an early introduction to their Armenian identity for them, and it's somewhere that they can build it through dance?
For sure. I mean, we've got a whole different, different types of students in the group. There are people that are, maybe partly Armenian. One of their parents is Armenian, the other parent isn't. So it's something completely new for them. They maybe recently found out about their Armenian side, or they were more connected to their Armenian side in recent years, and they come to our group wanting to learn more about it. And then there's the opposite end of it too. I mean, with the influx of, Syrian Armenians, for example, that came to Toronto in the last 10 years during the war. It's something that they would do back home. They missed it. They were looking for it, they had a longing for it. So they joined. So I think we definitely see both sides of it in our group. And, we're there to facilitate whichever type of student comes our way, because that's, I think, the main goal, the main reason that we have these dance groups and these different cultural groups. We keep these traditions alive in the diaspora, is to facilitate all different types of, people that come from different types of walks of life.
And to build that community. Like you say, it's more than just the dance. You're speaking language, you're sharing, and you're connecting. And I think that's wonderful. Carolyn, I want to kind of pivot that a little bit to the work that you're doing with preservation. Um, so because that's kind of building community in a sense, right? You're preserving these works and you're building an archive that you hope people will be able to access based on what you've documented. What is your ultimate hope for how people will use this archival resource that you're putting together?
Well, I hope that Armenians and others, if they're interested, will learn these dances and keep them alive. Because it shouldn't just be, a dead archive. In fact, um, when we were sitting around trying to decide what we should do to keep these dances alive, um, we said, well, we should go around the country and make sure we're teaching these. And so the idea has always been too that yes, we have this archive, but um, if we're not around to teach it, we hope that other people will teach it. And yet, I mean, I think it's exciting when dances evolve too. So, um, these shouldn't just be museum pieces, right? They should, I hope people dance them. So, and create with them. But I want to say it's really important I think, to have this library. Um, there are, let's just say, for example, rhythms that are unique to our homeland. And in my family in particular, some of my ancestors were from Harpert. And in the Harpert region and the De Kranaker region, there's a 10/8 rhythm. This is not common in Eastern Armenia and other parts, but it's one of the main rhythms that we have in this area. I grew up with it. When we were recording in Detroit, the band leader was a very famous clarinet player, Hacek Gazarian, and he's also a music professor. And so we were done with most of the recording, and he said, well, is there anything else you want to do? And I said, well, could you play a 10/8? And he said to me, young lady, what do you know about 10/8? And I thought, okay, I don't want to get into a musicology argument or discussion with him. He's a professor. But completely spontaneously and genuinely, I said, 10/8? 10/8 is just like my heartbeat. And he said, oh, well then, okay. so so this is where I think, this rootedness in the land of our ancestors. I mean, when I was in Turkey this past summer, just knowing that, my ancestors are there, they're there. They've been there for a millennium, since time immemorial. And to me, I think whenever I dance, even before I went there, that was my connection to place.
And do you think one of the things that we've talked a lot again on this podcast is about the experience of food and rooting us back to our ancestral homelands and experiences, and that's a sensory experience in the way that the dance is? And do you think those sensory experiences have just a unique power to connect us back to roots and to histories, even when you say, Carolyn, it's somewhere that you haven't been, right? Before, even before you had been, you had that connection. Do you think that's something unique to being able to embody something like dance?
Yeah, I mean, I think dance does it, music, as you said, food does it too. And I wanted to ask Sevag what it was like coming to DC in the dance showcase that we did together, because for me, bringing all these dance groups from different places, I felt very connected. It was really a wonderful feeling to meet people doing slightly different styles of Armenian dance, but it was wonderful to see. And I was on the creating end of it. So I'm just really curious what Sevag thinks, coming that way to DC.
For sure, I think it brings us all together. We all have that common goal when we're creating these dances in the diaspora, and just coming together. It's heartwarming to see that everybody's kind of in that same boat coming from the diaspora. The groups actually performed in all over, Armenia, Artsakh. We went to Artsakh as well when we were in Armenia. We've been to Argentina and Australia and New York, Washington D.C. As Caroline mentioned, that's where we met when she invited us in 2018. So we've been fortunate in that way, and just connecting with the diasporan youth from all these different walks of life while doing what I love has been just an incomparable experience. I think the biggest difference, and Caroline touched on this earlier, I think the biggest difference that I've seen is just the types of dances and the performances that are presented. So, as you mentioned, there are the stage dances, which are solely designed and choreographed to entertain. They're for entertainment purposes. And then there are the more traditional dances, which are passed down from our ancestors, and they're still performed the same way today. Not to say that, stage dances are not traditional. They definitely take aspects from our traditional dances, but they've been combined with different dance influences. Like you mentioned, ballet, is a heavy influence in Armenia. um, but just having traveled to these different countries to perform alongside these local Armenian dance groups and seeing, these different styles being performed, and I think that's partly influenced, by what the instructor wants to do, and also it's partly influenced by what the community has a longing for. So, there's diasporas that are more connected to Armenia, and so to say, they've had enough of these kind of traditional dances. So their community tends to, uh, go towards more of these stage dances. But then on the flip side, there are communities, that have a longing for these traditional dances. I know in our community, for example, being far away from Armenia, further from the traditions there and things like that, our community does have the longing for those traditional dances. So I think myself, both of them are important, both the stage dances and the traditional dances. So I tend to kind of incorporate both in our performances. But I have been seeing an increase in the interest of these traditional dances, whether it's in Armenia or the diaspora coming together and performing those dances, workshops, things like that. I mean, I'm sure with social media, many people have seen those impromptu dance classes at the steps of the Cascade in Yerevan. Hundreds of people show up and they learn our village dances. So I think that's a great step being taken towards preserving those traditional dances.
And when we dance together, no matter where we're from, um, we have different languages now because we're a diaspora, right? We live in different countries, but when we dance together, that transcends language. I mean, we can dance next to each other and do the same dance, and we don't have to understand the words that we're using to describe it. So to me, dance is a real unifier too.
Yeah, and I'll add to that because our group actually experienced that firsthand. So, for example, when we went to Australia, they're English speaking there, just like Canada, and we had that language connection with the youth there. But then when we went to Argentina and Uruguay while we were there, the Armenians there, they're very, old community. They've been there for generations. Not a lot of them spoke English. Not a lot of them spoke Armenian. But as you said, we still had that connection because we were dancing the dances of our forefathers. That was the language. That was the common language that we had.
And in a sense, like, as I haven't danced in years, but hearing you both talk about it, it sounds like there's an element of kind of storytelling, especially when we think of the off stage dances, right? The ones that have been passed down in more of a story, yeah, a storytelling approach. When I'm hearing you both speak about it, that's what's resonating with me as a way to maintain kind of pieces of identity that take shape through it. Carolyn, when you talk about tracing again the roots of what music was played and these medleys that are created, it's telling a story over time. So when we think about kind of where the story we are today in the wake of genocide and more recent displacement from places like Artsakh, what role do you think, or do you hope, that communal dance and dance that brings people together can play in preserving Armenian culture and memory and building the next phase of community in diaspora? I'll let whoever wants to jump in go.
Go ahead, Sevag.
Yeah, sure. I think just as important it is to hold on to our language, our religion and all the traditions in our culture. It's just as important, and I think more so even now, to instill dance in our youth and in the coming generations. By losing places like Artsakh, I think our cultural traditions can very easily go with it as well if we don't make that extra effort to hold on to them. So things like dance gatherings and teaching dance workshops, all these things, I think it's an important way to connect the diasporan youth to their culture in a time where it's even harder for them to recognize Armenia as a home. Uh, Again, because of that physical loss of our homeland and the culture that goes with it, because of all these displacements. And dance, especially, I think, is a great way to preserve this culture, our culture, because I think it has a special way of connecting in our roots when we dance, the steps of our ancestors, when we hear the traditional music of our ancestors. I think it unlocks a set of emotions that is only possible with, I think, very few forms of culture or art. So when we focus on preserving these traditions, I think it'll have a greater effect in helping our diaspora connect with their roots and just to continue creating this idea of a home in the diaspora.
And I'll add, what I do now is I teach Americans, non-Armenians, Armenian dance. And it's a great way to share our culture and our history. And, the cultural appreciation of another culture that people, for the most part, haven't heard of. A lot of Americans will say, I've never heard of Armenians. So I get to not just teach the dances, but teach a little bit about the culture. And I think all of us Armenians who can do that, I think that's really important. There are a few non Armenian teachers who have um, very good style and they understand the context of our dances, and I support that too. There's one teacher who's not Armenian who started inventing Armenian dances, and that kind of rubs me the wrong way a little bit. I don't think that's authentic. I won't mention any names, but I really think this idea of authenticity is critical, whether it's a contemporary creation or whether it's the old community dances. Authenticity is really at the heart of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you
I'll
both.
add to that as well. Sorry, I'll add to that as well because I had a similar experience. I went to Minneapolis not too long ago, and I was teaching a group there, a non-Armenian group. There were a couple Armenians. The instructor there, I'm not sure if you know her, Carolyn Digris. She runs a dance group there. So she got in touch with me. I went over to teach a group of non-Armenians. But again, the authenticity is what I was focusing on because here I am going to a community that might not know what Armenian dance is or what Armenians are in general. I didn't want to teach them those stage dances. I wanted to teach them, what a papuri is, what different kocharis are from different villages, yakushta, all these different dances. That was kind of my main focus. Um, and it was also kind of like a history lesson. It wasn't just, a dance. I was kind of telling them about the history of Armenians and all that. I think it all goes hand in hand. It's important. You spoke about 10/8 rhythm. I'm actually a percussionist as well. I play the Armenian dohol. So I took the dohol with me. I wanted to teach them the different, rhythms we have, the different patterns we have, the 10/8, like you mentioned, the 4/4, the 6/8. So all these things, they go hand in hand. And I think authenticity, like you said, should be the first thing that's focused on, especially when we're teaching, our traditions to non-Armenian groups.
Yeah, Thank you both for sharing that. One of the things that's come through really strongly for me in our conversation today is this balance or this harmony between culture and then contemporary creating. So how you're both continuously you're creating and you're adding to this body of work and to how people experience this. So in the diaspora, I know recently, in recent memory, we've seen new dances emerge like the Michigan Hop and the Armenian Shuffle, and these have been created by or attributed to Armenian American communities. So when we talk about authenticity and history and memory, but also how we continue creating, how do you see these new diaspora-born dances taking on their own significance? And how do you think people in the diaspora relate to these? How do you relate to them? Carolyn, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, one of the dances that I called out in early in my research um, is a dance called the Michigan Hop, sometimes called the Detroit Hop, and learning dances from other cultures. I know Bulgarian dances and Macedonian dances and so on. There's a dance that is that dance. And so I actually wrote about how this was similar to this Bulgarian dance, and I wasn't clear about its history. Well, I gave a lecture about the Hushamadian project to the Knights of Vartan in Detroit on Zoom. And in the audience, I sort of asked this question. An older gentleman, Gary Zamanigian, uh, explained that he was a student at Wayne State University back in the 1960s, and all the Armenian students would meet at the student union for lunch, and they sat with all the Greek students, Greek American students. And so the Greeks would come to the ACYOA dances, and the Greeks would go to their, or the Armenians would go to the Greek dances. And in 1966, they went to a dance at the Greek church, and they learned a dance that the Greeks said was a Macedonian dance. So they went to several of the ACYOA conventions around the United States, and they taught this dance. And eventually, that was the dance that became the Michigan Hop. So I guess it was actually a Macedonian dance. But anyway, that's how culture is alive. And so today, not only is it happening, face to face, but because of social media, we are interacting as dancers, either watching each other's dances and incorporating them, or sometimes live. I mean, one of the things that I do in my teaching of Americans is I teach on Zoom. And like you mentioned, Sevag, Nairi also teaches on Zoom. But what was born in the pandemic are dancing evenings, usually, but sometimes whole weekends, uh, with Zoom communities. And so I can actually dance all over the world just about any night of the week. And that's very exciting. There are some dancers in Armenia, Gagaganosian's students, who have joined some of us on Zoom, and we dance for each other, and we learn what they're doing, and they learn what we're doing. So anyway, that's the new, I think, the newest thing that's going on.
Sevag, for you, you mentioned social media earlier, actually, and then Carolyn, you just mentioned social media now, and we can't avoid it. It's everywhere, isn't it? And it absolutely plays a role, I think, in diaspora. And I remember a few years ago, even at the Institute, we were doing research on digital diasporas, and that's a whole other can of worms that is fascinating that we could get into. But I'm really curious, related to this question of the emergence of new dances or the emergence of augmentations to existing dances. How does social media play a role? Have you seen that play out?
I think, I guess just like anything, not only dance, there's more, it's things are more easily accessible, and because of that there's more awareness. So I don't know if I have too much of the experience with these kind of dances in our community. It's more of I think it's more of an Armenian American community thing. I don't know of any dances really that exist in the Canadian Armenian community. We have the typical shurtbar dances and things like that we do during events here and there, but there aren't really like the Michigan hop that was mentioned or things like that. We don't really have that, but I mean, I do see them on social media. Like I said, the accessibility is there. So, um, yeah, I don't know if I can comment any further on that because we don't really have the experience here with that type of dance.
Yeah, but even with social media, you're able to kind of see it and watch the progression of
For
that.
sure.
And who
Yeah.
knows, maybe 10 years down the line, you are starting to see that. Even with how rapid I think social media is, and it always gives us this sensation that things are changing and creating and inventing. I imagine an art form like dance maybe doesn't always react so quickly, but maybe in the future there'll be the Armenian Canadian diaspora will have a new advent to the cultural repertoire. But I
Yes.
will,
Who knows?
yeah, well maybe you'll start one. There you go, Sevag. You've got to
Yeah.
you've got to add one. We'll see it. It'll trend on social media. It'll be
Yes.
fantastic.
Exactly.
Everyone, all Canadians will be doing Armenian dance, me included. Yeah. All jokes aside, I'll end us today's conversation on another big and broad question. We started big and broad and a little bit philosophical, so let's end there. When you imagine the future of Armenian dance, what do you hope survives, and are there things you hope change?
Well, I'll say one thing about what I hope survives. One of the things that I love about community social dancing, Armenian dances in that context, is that you have little children all the way up to 90-year-old elders dancing together. And to me, that intergenerational dancing, I hope that continues. That's what I see and hope for in the future.
As I mentioned, I've been seeing, and many people as well have been seeing, this new interest in our traditional dances, whether it's in the diaspora or even in Armenia. There's been this reemergence of, our traditional Armenian dances. So I hope what I would like to see is not only for that to survive, but also to grow because it is the base of our dances. It's the base of our dance culture. It's where our stage dances are born from. And I think without them, there wouldn't be this continuation of the preservation of our dances. In terms of what I'd like to see changed, though, I think we see sometimes dances being performed incorrectly, not authentically. Specific dances being performed to not necessarily the correct music. For example, Yarkushta being danced to, let's say, a Kochari music. The general public may not know these differences. But what I'd like to see changed, I guess, is the increased education, especially in the diaspora, by individuals who've taken the time to study these things, our dances and our traditions, and instill that education in our diaspora so that it can grow and it can survive. I think it's a key factor in preserving our culture and ensuring that the bridge between diaspora being connected to Armenia can withstand obstacles and things that can come our way.
Beautiful. Thank you both for sharing not only your response to that question and kind of your vision for the future of Armenian dance and the Armenian dance community, but today's whole conversation, you've brought your lived experience and your bodies of work, and also your personal histories and anecdotes and deep connections to the diaspora community and your roots. So I really appreciate that. I know everyone listening will really appreciate it, and hopefully, maybe it'll inspire someone to go on social media, look up some examples of Armenian dance, get on Zoom with Carolyn and do some Armenian dance. So thank you both so much. I hope you've enjoyed this little chance to kind of reconnect and see one another again. And on behalf of the Institute and our team, a big thank you and our appreciation for today's conversation.
Thank you very much and keep dancing.
That sums it up. Keep dancing. I love that.
Well, that is all for our episode today. Thank you again for tuning in and listening to another episode of Dispersion, a podcast by the Zorian Institute, a nonprofit organization that serves the cause of scholarship and public awareness relating to issues of universal human rights, genocide, and diaspora-homeland relations. If you'd like to learn more about diaspora studies or about the Zorian Institute's other projects and programs, we invite you to visit our website at www.zorianinstitute.org. Next time on Dispersion, we'll be talking to two brand new guests who share with us their unique experiences and introduce us to a new diaspora concept.